Picture this. The skies over Nazi-occupied Europe, 1944. A young American pilot with a Polish heart and an unbreakable will is about to become a legend. His name is Francis Stanley Gabreski, but the world knows him simply as Gabby. By the time the guns fell silent over Europe, he would stand alone as America's top fighter ace in that theater, with 28 confirmed aerial victories. But this isn't just a story about numbers on a scoreboard. This is a story about courage, determination, survival against impossible odds, and the making of an American hero whose fighting spirit would define a generation. Welcome to the extraordinary tale of Gabby Gabreski, the son of Polish immigrants who soared above the battlefields of World War II to cement his place in aviation history. Over the next hour, we're going to walk together through every twist and turn of his remarkable journey. From his humble beginnings in Pennsylvania coal country to the cockpit of a P-47 Thunderbolt screaming through enemy skies, we'll explore what made this man not just a skilled pilot, but one of the greatest combat aviators America has ever produced. So settle in, because this is a story that deserves to be told in full, with all its drama, all its danger, and all its humanity. This is the story of how one man's refusal to quit, even when death seemed certain, inspired an entire nation and changed the course of aerial warfare forever. Let's begin at the beginning, in the small town of Oil City, Pennsylvania, where Francis Stanley Gabreski was born on January 28, 1919. His parents, Franciszek and Anastasia Gabreski, had immigrated to America from Poland, seeking the promise of a better life that drew millions to America's shores in the early 20th century. They settled in Pennsylvania's oil region, where Franciszek found work and built a life for his growing family. Young Francis, the second of 6 children, grew up in a household where Polish traditions blended with American dreams. His parents worked hard, instilled strong values in their children, and maintained their cultural heritage while embracing their new homeland. It was a classic immigrant story, the kind that built America, brick by brick, family by family. But there was something different about young Francis, something that would set him apart from the very beginning. From his earliest days, Francis was fascinated by flight. This was the golden age of aviation, remember. Charles Lindbergh had crossed the Atlantic just before Francis's 8th birthday. Amelia Earhart was making headlines. The airplane, once considered a curious novelty, was rapidly becoming a symbol of human achievement and possibility. For a young boy growing up in small-town Pennsylvania, the idea of soaring through the clouds represented freedom, adventure, and a chance to transcend the ordinary. But there was a problem. Francis wasn't exactly a natural student. He struggled in school, not because he lacked intelligence, but because traditional academics didn't capture his imagination the way machines in motion did. He was hands-on, practical, the kind of kid who learned by doing rather than by reading. This would later become one of his greatest strengths as a pilot, but as a teenager, it meant his path forward wasn't entirely clear. After graduating from high school, Francis enrolled at the University of Notre Dame in 1937. It was there that his life began to take shape in ways he couldn't have predicted. Notre Dame, with its strong Catholic tradition and respect for diverse backgrounds, was a good fit for a young man from a Polish immigrant family. But more importantly, Notre Dame offered something that would change Francis's life forever. The Civilian Pilot Training Program. The CPTP was part of America's quiet preparation for the war that many saw coming on the horizon. The program offered college students the chance to learn to fly, ostensibly for civilian purposes, but everyone knew what it really meant. America was building a reserve of trained pilots, just in case. For Francis Gabreski, it was like a door opening directly into his dreams. He threw himself into flight training with an enthusiasm and dedication that his academic instructors had rarely seen from him. And something clicked. In the cockpit, Francis found his element. The three-dimensional thinking required for aviation, the need for quick decisions and physical coordination, the blend of technical knowledge and instinctive feel, all of it came naturally to him. His instructors noticed immediately. This young man had the right stuff. He wasn't just competent, he was gifted. But Francis's college career came to an end before he could graduate. It wasn't the flying that did him in. It was the academics. He left Notre Dame without a degree, but with something potentially more valuable. A pilot's license and a burning desire to fly. The question was, where would that desire take him? The answer came in 1940, when Francis made the decision that would define his life. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps. This was still more than a year before Pearl Harbor, before America entered the war that was already consuming Europe. But tensions were rising, and the military was expanding. For a young man who wanted to fly, there was no better option. Francis entered military flight training, and once again proved himself a natural aviator. He earned his wings and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in March 1941. For most of that year, he served stateside, instructing other pilots and honing his own skills. But everything changed on December 7, 1941, when Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor and America found itself thrust into a global conflict. Francis Gabreski desperately wanted to get into the fight, but like many eager young pilots, he found himself initially assigned to duties that, while important, weren't combat roles. He was sent to Hawaii, where the scars of Pearl Harbor were still fresh and raw. There, he served with the 45th Fighter Squadron, flying P-39 and P-40 aircraft on patrol and defense missions. It was necessary work, protecting American territory in the Pacific, but it wasn't what Francis wanted. He wanted to test himself against the enemy in real combat. His opportunity came from an unexpected source: his Polish heritage. In 1942, the Polish Air Force was operating alongside the British Royal Air Force, and there was a program allowing American pilots of Polish descent to serve with Polish squadrons. For Francis Gabreski, it was perfect. He volunteered immediately and was accepted. In late 1942, he shipped out to England, assigned to the 315th Polish Fighter Squadron. Now, you might wonder why this mattered so much to him. It wasn't just about getting into combat, though that was certainly part of it. Francis Gabreski felt a deep connection to his Polish roots. His parents had left Poland, yes, but they had never stopped being Polish in their hearts. They had taught their children about their heritage, their language, their culture. When Poland was invaded by Nazi Germany in September 1939, starting the European War, it hit the Gabreski family personally. The old country was suffering. For Francis, fighting alongside Polish pilots against the Germans wasn't just a military assignment. It was personal. It was family. His time with the Polish squadron was eye-opening. These were combat-hardened pilots who had been fighting since the beginning of the war. Many had escaped from Poland as their country fell, made their way to Britain, and continued the fight from exile. They had seen their homeland destroyed, their families torn apart, their comrades killed. They fought with a fierce determination that came from having everything to lose and nothing left but vengeance and hope. Flying alongside these men, Francis Gabreski learned lessons that no training program could teach. He learned about aerial combat tactics from pilots who had survived hundreds of missions. He learned about the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, its strengths and weaknesses, its tactics and tendencies. He learned about the Spitfire, the legendary British fighter he was now flying. And perhaps most importantly, he learned about the mindset of a combat pilot. The balance between aggression and caution, between courage and calculation, between taking risks and staying alive. But Francis also faced a challenge: the language barrier. While his parents had taught him some Polish at home, he wasn't fluent, and the technical language of aviation made communication difficult at times. But he persevered, and his Polish squadron mates respected his dedication. They accepted him as one of their own, and that acceptance meant everything to him. However, Francis's time with the Polish squadron was relatively brief. By the spring of 1943, he was reassigned to the United States Army Air Force's 56th Fighter Group, which was just arriving in England as part of the 8th Air Force. The 8th Air Force was building up for what would become the massive aerial campaign against Nazi Germany, and experienced pilots were desperately needed. Francis's time with the Poles had given him something most American pilots lacked: combat experience in the European theater. The 56th Fighter Group would become one of the most famous fighter units in American military history, and Francis Gabreski would become its shining star. But in early 1943, they were just getting started, a group of eager but mostly inexperienced American pilots flying a new aircraft, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, preparing to take on the Luftwaffe. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a beast of an aircraft. Massive, powerful, heavily armed, and tough as nails. It was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war, weighing in at over 7 tons when fully loaded. Some pilots called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut, because of its size and durability. It had 8 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, giving it devastating firepower. And it had a supercharged engine that gave it excellent performance at high altitude, perfect for escorting American bombers deep into German territory. But the P-47 was also a challenge to fly. especially for pilots used to lighter, more maneuverable aircraft. It took muscle to handle, especially in combat, and it wasn't the fastest fighter out there. German fighters like the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 109 could outrun it under certain conditions. But the P-47 had advantages that mattered in combat. It could take punishment and keep flying. It could dive faster than almost anything in the sky, and in the hands of a skilled pilot, it was a deadly weapon. Francis Gabreski took to the P-47 like he was born to fly it. He appreciated its ruggedness, its firepower, its ability to bring him home, even when riddled with bullets and holes. And he quickly developed tactics that played to the Thunderbolt's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. This was the mark of a great combat pilot, not just flying the aircraft, but understanding it so deeply that man and machine became one. In the spring and summer of 1943, Francis flew mission after mission over occupied Europe. The 8th Air Force's campaign was building momentum. American B-17 and B-24 bombers were striking deep into Germany, hitting industrial targets, trying to cripple the Nazi war machine from the air. But the cost was horrific. German fighters and flak, anti-aircraft fire, were tearing the bomber formations apart. The bomber crews called the missions suicide runs, and they weren't exaggerating. The life expectancy of a bomber crew member was measured in missions, not months. The American fighters, including Francis and his fellow Thunderbolt pilots, had one primary job: protect the bombers, get them to the target, and get them home. It sounds simple, but in practice, it was incredibly complex and dangerous. The fighters had to maintain formation with the slower bombers, which made them vulnerable. They had to watch for German fighters attacking from any direction, above, below, out of the sun. And they had to be ready to break off and engage the enemy at a moment's notice, then fight their way through superior numbers to protect their big brothers. Francis Gabreski flew his first combat mission with the 56th Fighter Group in April 1943. And over the next several months, he participated in mission after mission, learning, adapting, surviving. But he didn't score his first kill right away. Aerial combat wasn't like target practice. The enemy didn't cooperate. They twisted, turned, dove, climbed, disappeared into clouds. And the sky was enormous, three-dimensional, disorienting. Many pilots flew dozens of missions without ever getting a clear shot at an enemy aircraft. But Francis was patient and observant. He studied every engagement, learning from the successes and mistakes of others. He developed his marksmanship, learning to lead his targets, to fire in short, controlled bursts to conserve ammunition and avoid jamming his guns. He learned energy management, the art of using altitude and speed to maintain an advantage in combat. And he learned situational awareness, the critical ability to keep track of multiple aircraft in a chaotic three-dimensional battlefield while someone was actively trying to kill you. His breakthrough came in August 1943. During a bomber escort mission, Francis spotted a German fighter maneuvering to attack a formation of B-17s. He dove on the enemy aircraft, closed to effective range, and opened fire. His bullets found their mark. The German fighter burst into flames and went down. Francis's first confirmed kill. He was officially an ace in the making. From that point forward, Francis Gabreski's kill count began to climb. September brought more victories. October added to the total. By the end of 1943, he was becoming known throughout the 8th Air Force as one of its most skilled and aggressive pilots. But Francis never fought for personal glory. His focus was always on the mission, protecting the bombers, bringing his fellow pilots home safely, and doing maximum damage to the enemy. As 1944 began, Francis Gabreski was promoted to captain and given command of the 61st Fighter Squadron within the 56th Fighter Group. This was a huge responsibility. He was now leading other pilots into combat, responsible for their lives as well as his own. But Francis was ready. His leadership style was direct, practical, and based on example. He never asked his pilots to do anything he wouldn't do himself. In fact, he was usually out front, taking the most dangerous positions, drawing enemy fire away from less experienced pilots. The aerial campaign over Europe was reaching its peak. The Allies were preparing for D-Day, the invasion of Normandy that would open the Western Front. Air superiority was critical. The Luftwaffe had to be defeated, or at least reduced to the point where it couldn't interfere with the invasion. Every mission, every combat, every kill mattered. And Francis Gabreski was racking up kills at an impressive rate. His tactics were aggressive but calculated. He was a deflection shooter, meaning he excelled at hitting targets that were crossing his flight path rather than flying directly away or toward him. This required split-second timing and extraordinary hand-eye coordination. Francis had both in abundance. He also had something else: killer instinct. Not in a bloodthirsty sense, but in the way that great athletes and warriors have always had. When the moment came, when the shot presented itself, Francis didn't hesitate. He acted, and his actions were devastatingly effective. By spring 1944, Francis had over 20 confirmed kills, putting him among the top American aces in the European theater. But he wasn't focused on the numbers. He was focused on winning the war. Every German fighter he shot down was one less threat to American bombers, one less pilot who could kill his comrades, one less obstacle between the Allied forces and victory. Then came D-Day, June 6, 1944. Francis and the 56 Fighter Group were in the air over the invasion beaches, providing air cover for the greatest amphibious assault in history. The Luftwaffe made a surprisingly weak showing, testament to the success of the Allied air campaign in the months leading up to the invasion. Francis flew multiple missions that day and in the days that followed, helping to ensure that Allied ground forces could advance inland without being torn apart from the air. In the weeks after D-Day, as Allied forces fought to break out of Normandy, Francis continued to add to his score. He was now being mentioned in press reports back home, the American public hungry for heroes, for stories of triumph in the midst of a brutal war. But Francis remained focused on the mission, uncomfortable with the attention, more concerned with his squadron than with his personal fame. By July 1944, Francis Gabreski had 28 confirmed aerial victories, making him the top American ace in the European theater. 28 German aircraft destroyed in combat. It was an extraordinary achievement, a testament to his skill, his courage, and his determination. But it was also tragically about to come to an end. On July 20, 1944, Francis took off on what was supposed to be a ground attack mission, strafing German targets in occupied territory. These missions were incredibly dangerous, flying low and slow, making yourself vulnerable to ground fire from machine guns and light anti-aircraft weapons. Many pilots hated strafing runs more than they feared air-to-air combat, because there was no way to fight back against bullets coming up from the ground. Francis's mission that day was to attack a German airfield. As he made his strafing run, flying at high speed just feet above the ground, his P-47 clipped an object on the airfield. Some accounts say it was a gun emplacement, others say it was simply a mound of earth. Whatever it was, the impact damaged his aircraft. The Thunderbolt, tough as it was, couldn't overcome the damage at that altitude and speed. Francis tried desperately to gain altitude, to keep the aircraft flying long enough to make it back to Allied territory. But it was no use. The P-47 was going down. He had seconds to make a decision: try to crash land, or bail out over enemy territory. He chose to crash land, knowing it was risky but hoping to avoid capture. The crash was violent. The P-47 plowed into a field in German-occupied France. Francis survived the impact, injured but alive. He climbed from the wreckage, dazed and in pain. And then he ran. He had to reach Allied lines or find someone in the French resistance who could hide him. If the Germans caught him, his war was over. For the next several hours, Francis evaded German patrols, moving through the French countryside, trying to stay hidden, trying to reach safety. But the Germans were searching for him. They knew an American pilot had gone down in the area, and eventually they found him. Francis Gabreski, America's top ace in Europe with 28 kills, was now a prisoner of war. He was taken to a German prison camp, initially to an interrogation center where the Germans tried to extract military information from captured airmen. Francis, like all American service members, was trained in what to do if captured. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. The Germans tried various techniques, from friendly conversation to intimidation, but Francis gave them nothing of value. From the interrogation center, he was sent to Stalag Luft I, a prisoner of war camp on the Baltic coast specifically for captured Allied airmen. Stalag Luft I held thousands of American and British pilots, bombardiers, navigators, and other aircrew members shot down over Europe. The conditions were harsh. Food was scarce. The barracks were cold in winter, stifling in summer. Disease was common. And the psychological toll of captivity, of not knowing when or if the war would end, when or if you would see home again, was crushing. But Francis Gabreski endured. He adapted to the routine of camp life, found ways to maintain his physical and mental health, and connected with his fellow prisoners. The airmen in the camp created a community, looking out for each other, sharing resources, keeping each other's spirits up. They organized classes, taught each other skills, debated politics and philosophy, anything to keep their minds active and fight off the despair that threatened to consume them. Francis spent 10 months as a prisoner of war. 10 months of uncertainty, hardship, and longing for home. But he never gave up hope. He believed the Allies would win. He believed he would survive to see that victory. And he was right. In May 1945, as Soviet forces advanced across northern Germany, Stalag Luft I was liberated. Francis Gabreski and his fellow prisoners were free. The war in Europe was ending. Nazi Germany was defeated. And Francis was going home. He returned to the United States a hero. The press covered his arrival. His hometown celebrated. The military awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross with multiple oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal, and numerous other honors. He was feted at banquets, interviewed by reporters, held up as an example of American courage and skill. But Francis Gabreski wasn't finished serving his country. After the war, he remained in what was now the United States Air Force, the Army Air Forces having become a separate branch in 1947. He was a career officer, and he loved flying too much to walk away. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, Francis volunteered for combat duty. He was now in his 30s, much older than most fighter pilots, with a family at home. He could have stayed stateside, ridden out the war in a training or administrative role. But that wasn't who he was. He wanted to fly and fight. In Korea, Francis flew the F-86 Sabre, America's first swept-wing jet fighter, against Soviet-built MiG-15s flown by North Korean, Chinese, and covertly by Soviet pilots. Jet combat was different from the propeller-driven aerial battles of World War II, faster, happening at higher altitudes, with different tactics and challenges. But Francis adapted. He had always been a student of combat flying, always learning, always improving. During his combat tour in Korea, Francis added 6.5 more aerial victories to his total, making him one of only 7 American pilots to achieve ace status in both World War II and Korea. His final tally was 34.5 confirmed aerial victories, making him one of the top American fighter pilots in history. After Korea, Francis continued to serve in the Air Force, rising through the ranks. He commanded fighter wings, held important staff positions, and mentored younger pilots. He retired as a colonel in 1967, after more than a quarter-century of service. But even in retirement, Francis Gabreski remained connected to aviation and to the military community. He was a sought-after speaker, sharing his experiences with new generations of pilots and with the public. He was active in veterans organizations, particularly those supporting former prisoners of war. And he worked to preserve the history of World War II aviation, ensuring that the sacrifices and achievements of his generation would not be forgotten. Francis Gabreski lived to the age of 83, passing away in January 2002. His funeral was attended by fellow veterans, active duty service members, and grateful citizens who understood what he and his generation had done to preserve freedom in the face of tyranny. So what made Gabby Gabreski great? What set him apart from the thousands of other talented, brave pilots who fought in World War II? It's a question worth exploring, because the answer tells us something important about courage, skill, and character. First, there was natural ability. Francis had a gift for three-dimensional thinking, for hand-eye coordination, for the kind of spatial awareness that great pilots need. You can teach someone to fly an airplane, but you can't teach instinct. Either you have it or you don't. Francis had it. Second, there was dedication. From his first flight in the civilian pilot training program at Notre Dame, Francis threw himself completely into becoming the best pilot he could be. He studied, practiced, learned from every flight, every mistake, every success. He never stopped trying to improve. Third, there was combat experience. His time with the Polish squadron gave him a crucial head start. When he joined the 56 Fighter Group, he wasn't a green pilot learning on the job. He was already a combat veteran with knowledge of enemy tactics and the realities of aerial warfare. That experience saved his life and made him more effective from his very first mission. Fourth, there was temperament. Francis had the right psychological makeup for combat flying. He could be aggressive when needed, but wasn't reckless. He could make split-second decisions under enormous stress. He could face mortal danger repeatedly without being paralyzed by fear. This mental toughness is as important as physical skill in combat. Fifth, there was leadership. When Francis was given command of a squadron, he didn't just lead. He inspired. His pilots knew he would never ask them to do something he wouldn't do. They knew he would protect them, teach them, bring them home if humanly possible. That kind of leadership creates unit cohesion and effectiveness that goes beyond individual skill. And finally, there was character. Francis Gabreski fought for something bigger than himself. He fought for his country, yes, but also for his heritage, for his family's homeland of Poland, for the bomber crews he escorted, for the fellow pilots he commanded. His motivation wasn't personal glory. It was service, and that purity of purpose made him effective and kept him grounded even when fame came calling. The story of Francis Gabreski is a story of the American dream, of an immigrant's son who rose to become one of his nation's greatest warriors. But it's also a universal story about what human beings are capable of when they find their purpose, develop their gifts, and commit themselves completely to something greater than themselves. Think about what Francis accomplished. He learned to fly, mastered one of the most difficult and dangerous jobs in warfare, survived hundreds of combat missions, shot down 28 enemy aircraft, survived being shot down himself, endured 10 months as a prisoner of war, came home and rebuilt his life, went back to war in Korea and succeeded again, and then served his country for decades more. It's an extraordinary life by any measure. But Francis would have been uncomfortable with being called extraordinary. Men like him, the great warriors of his generation, tended to deflect praise. They'd tell you they were just doing their job, that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home, that they were simply lucky to survive. That humility was part of what made them great. Today, there are very few World War II veterans still with us. The men and women who fought in that conflict are in their late 90s or older. Soon, they will all be gone, and we will have only their stories, their legacy, and the world they fought to preserve. That makes it more important than ever to remember them, to study their experiences, to understand what they endured and what they achieved. Francis Gabreski's story reminds us that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. He wasn't born a hero. He was born a working-class kid in small-town Pennsylvania. But he had dreams, and he had determination, and when his country called, he answered. He found within himself reserves of courage and skill he might never have known he possessed. And he used those gifts in service of a cause that mattered. The aerial war over Europe in World War II was one of the most brutal and unforgiving campaigns in military history. Young men, most barely out of their teens, climbed into complex machines and flew into skies filled with enemies trying to kill them. Many never came home. Those who did were forever changed by what they had seen and done. The statistics are sobering. The 8th Air Force alone lost over 26,000 men killed and over 21,000 prisoners of war. That's almost half the force. Every mission was a roll of the dice. Every takeoff might be your last. The men who flew knew this, accepted it, and flew anyway, because they believed in what they were fighting for. They believed that stopping Nazi Germany was worth the risk, worth the sacrifice, worth everything they had to give. Francis Gabreski embodied that spirit. He could have stayed stateside after his initial assignments. He had opportunities to take safer posts. But he kept volunteering for combat, kept flying into danger, because that was where he could make the most difference. That's the definition of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear, to put yourself at risk for something greater than yourself. And when he was shot down and captured, he didn't break. He survived. He endured. He came home. And then, incredibly, he went back and did it again in Korea. That kind of resilience, that kind of dedication, is rare and precious. The lessons from Francis Gabreski's life extend far beyond military aviation. His story teaches us about the importance of finding what we're meant to do and pursuing it with everything we have. It teaches us about the value of continuous learning and improvement. It teaches us about leadership, about character, about service to something greater than ourselves. In our modern world, where physical courage is less often required of most people, we can still apply these lessons. We face different kinds of battles, different kinds of challenges, but the principles remain the same. Work hard, keep learning, lead by example, serve others, stay humble, never quit. Francis Gabreski never sought fame or glory. He sought to do his duty to the best of his ability. The recognition came as a byproduct of that focus on excellence and service. That's a lesson worth remembering in an age that often seems obsessed with celebrity and attention for its own sake. Real achievement, lasting legacy, comes from dedication to craft and service to others, not from self-promotion. The P-47 Thunderbolts that Francis and his fellow pilots flew are museum pieces now, lovingly restored and maintained by dedicated volunteers. A few still fly at air shows, their massive engines roaring, reminding audiences of the power and majesty of these warbirds. When you see one, remember the men who flew them in combat. Remember what they risked. Remember what they achieved. The skies over Europe are peaceful now. The nations that once fought so bitterly are now allies, partners, friends. That transformation is one of the great success stories of the 20th century, and it was bought with the blood and sacrifice of men like Francis Gabreski and his comrades. They fought not for conquest, but for liberation. They fought not to destroy nations, but to free them. And when the war was over, America helped rebuild even its former enemies. That's worth remembering and worth honoring. Francis Gabreski's 28 victories in World War II stand as a testament to his skill as a fighter pilot. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Behind each of those victories was a moment of supreme danger, a test of skill and courage, a fight for survival. Behind those numbers were missions where Francis protected bombers, saving the lives of crew members who made it home, because he and his fellow fighters kept the Germans away. Behind those numbers was leadership, teaching younger pilots how to survive, how to fight, how to win. The title of ace, earned by achieving 5 aerial victories, was rare enough. Only about 5% of fighter pilots in World War II achieved ace status. To reach 28 victories required not just skill, but also opportunity and survival. You had to be good enough to win fights and lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time repeatedly. And you had to avoid the fate that claimed so many others, being shot down, being killed, being captured before you could add to your score. Francis had all of that. The skill, the opportunities, and for most of his tour, the luck. When his luck ran out on that July day in 1944, he had already secured his place in history. The crash and subsequent imprisonment didn't diminish his achievements. If anything, his survival and return home made the story even more remarkable. As we come to the end of this hour together, I want to leave you with a final thought. The world that Francis Gabreski and his generation fought to preserve is the world we live in today. The freedoms we enjoy, the peace we sometimes take for granted, the prosperity that lifts millions out of poverty, all of it rests on the foundation they built through their sacrifice. We owe them a debt we can never fully repay. But we can remember them. We can tell their stories. We can teach our children about what they did and why it mattered. We can strive to be worthy of their sacrifice by being the best versions of ourselves, by serving others, by standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Francis Stanley Gabreski, Gabby to his friends and fellow pilots, was one of America's greatest fighter pilots. But he was also a son, a husband, a father, a friend, a leader, a teacher, a mentor. He was a complete human being who happened to excel in one of the most demanding and dangerous professions ever created. He lived a life of service, courage, and quiet dignity. He asked for nothing more than the opportunity to do his duty and the chance to go home when it was done. He got both, and we are all the richer for his service and his example. May we never forget him, or the thousands like him who gave their youth, their innocence, and too often their lives, so that we might live in freedom. That is the legacy of Francis Gabreski. That is the legacy of the greatest generation. That is a legacy worth preserving and passing on to those who come after us. Thank you for spending this hour with me, exploring the life and legacy of an American hero. May his story inspire us to be better, to serve more, to give back to a world that too often takes without acknowledging the cost. And may we never forget that freedom isn't free, that peace must be defended, and that courage and character still matter, perhaps now more than ever. Francis Gabreski showed us what one person can accomplish when they find their purpose and pursue it with dedication and integrity. He showed us that humble beginnings don't determine final destinations. He showed us that skill without character is empty, but character without skill is limited. Together, skill and character can change the world. He changed his piece of it, one mission at a time, one victory at a time, one example at a time. And his story endures, a beacon for anyone who wonders whether they have what it takes to face their own challenges, whatever those challenges might be. If a working-class kid from Pennsylvania could become America's top ace in Europe, what might you be capable of if you truly committed yourself? That's the question his life poses to each of us. That's the challenge his example presents. Not to be fighter pilots, necessarily, but to be the best version of ourselves we can possibly be, in whatever field we choose, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. Francis Gabreski answered that challenge. He became the best he could be. And in doing so, he became a legend, a hero, and an inspiration that will last as long as people value courage, skill, dedication, and service. His 28 victories over Nazi Germany are recorded in the history books. But his greater victory was the life he lived, the example he set, and the inspiration he provides to this day. That is a victory that can never be taken away, never diminished, never forgotten. That is the victory that matters most.